name is Olivia Nelson. I recently turned 30. Today, I want to share with you the story of the major turning point in my life. I have an older brother who is 2 years older than me. His name is Scott. From a young age, Scott was what you'd call a pretty boy. His facial features were well defined early on, and his handsome face was so talked about in the neighborhood that rumors spread about talent scouts from modeling agencies coming for him. He was what you might call a real heartthrob. He was likable, intelligent, and quick-witted, even as a child. Our parents, as well as the adults around us, all adored him. On the other hand, for some reason, I was the only one in our family who was a bit on the chubby side from kindergarten. Even though my facial features were similar to Scott's, being a bit chubby took away from my charm, and that's an understatement. I was shy, not very engaging, and I wasn't much of a talker, so I never got the chance to be praised as a smart kid like Scott. I noticed from an early age that people around us often contrasted us, labeling Scott and me as polar opposites. Our parents must have caught wind of this talk too. By the time I was in elementary school, it seems like my parents had lost interest in me. I didn't perform as well on school tests as Scott had at the same age, and I remained somewhat chubby. Scott was served an afternoon snack, but I wasn't. Despite this, I remained chubby. My mother used to laugh and say, "You really are as round as a ball." When I was a child, I didn't fully understand what she meant, and I just felt happy that she was laughing, but looking back, I realized that I was just the butt of her jokes. Scott would get new clothes and shoes for all sorts of reasons: his birthday, scoring a goal at his soccer club. Meanwhile, even though I was a girl, I got hand-me-downs from Scott. Not just clothes, but shoes too. I can't remember how many times I tripped because the shoes didn't fit me. The only thing I treasured was the backpack that my grandparents gave me, just for me, before they passed away. After a while, Scott graduated from elementary school and moved on to a private middle school. My parents were overjoyed when he was accepted to a prestigious school known for its high academic standards. Around this time, Scott was so handsome that he was scouted to be a child model. Thanks to that, my parents, especially my mother, would often take Scott and purposefully walk down bustling streets like Fifth Avenue. She seemed to be saying, "Look how handsome my son is." On the other hand, I don't recall ever going out with my mother. Perhaps when I was a baby, but not after I grew up and became aware of things. Once, Scott suggested, "Next time, let's take Olivia with us too." I think he was aware, even as a child, that I was being neglected by our parents. But my mother just grimaced at Scott's words and replied, "Yes, someday." I didn't feel happy about Scott's considerate words. Rather, I felt miserable. A few years later, I also entered middle school. Unlike Scott, I went to a regular public middle school. To begin with, my parents never really expected much from me, so it seemed they had no intention of letting me take any exams. My dad even declared, "I can't afford to spend money on you." I didn't necessarily want to go to a private school, but being told such things from the start makes me feel like my life options are being limited. When I was little, I vaguely thought, is this how it is with sisters? I didn't know what other families were like. By the time I was born and aware, the abnormalities of this household were the norm. Around this time, I was going through puberty and started wondering, why am I the only one being treated differently? But the treatment I received from my parents only became stricter. Even though my mom was a housewife and should have had time, she often made me do the chores and go shopping while she went out to play with her friends. My dad too, when I said I wanted to go play with my friends, would accuse me. "What about the household chores?" My brother always cared about me, helped out, and even argued with our parents on my behalf, but they wouldn't listen to his opinions when it came to treating me. Eventually, my brother has a focus on high school entrance exams and then moved on to one of the top prep schools in the state, which meant he no longer had time to pay attention to me or our home. And that's when I truly started to understand what hell was like. The first incident was the no showing up in parent-teacher meeting. In other families, parents missing a parent-teacher meeting would be a big deal. But for my parents, it was more like, "We're not going, so what?" So it wasn't really considered an incident. During my 3 years of middle school, my parents only attended one meeting when I was in my first year. They didn't come during my second year or even during the crucial time of my third year when exams were around the corner. My homeroom teacher worried, "Is something happening at home?" But I brushed it off. I knew my situation wasn't normal, but it's not like my parents were physically abusive. I didn't know how to express the ongoing mental torment I was experiencing. It felt embarrassing to talk about it, as if I was confessing I'm a child not cherished by her own parents. The incidents continued. The New Year's Eve abandonment. At the end of that year, my parents took my brother to my mom's hometown and left me behind. Up until the previous year, I was included, but that year they said, "You're a student preparing for exams, so stay at home and study." I guess studying was just a pretext. They probably just found me annoying. So I ended up spending New Year's Eve all by myself. I didn't want to ask my friends to hang out on such a day because it felt like saying I'm a lonely kid who was left behind, so I stayed home not meeting anyone. I held back my painful feelings, watched the Grammys alone, turned into the New Year's Eve specials, and went to bed after shedding a few tears. It happened the next morning. Ding dong, ding dong! The doorbell rang incessantly, and I jumped out of bed. It was too early for my family to be back. I nervously checked who was on the doorbell camera. There stood my uncle and aunt from my mom's side. Shocked, I rushed to the door with my bed hair and asked, "What's happening?" "Olivia, leave this house. We've already discussed this with your mom. Don't worry, we'll take care of all the formalities," my uncle stated abruptly. "Wait, what do you mean?" I stammered, thrown off by his demeanor. I couldn't comprehend what he meant by leaving the house. "Olivia, if you don't mind, we want you to become our daughter. We don't have any children of our own, but ever since you were born, we've always thought of you as our daughter," my aunt said softly, tears welling in her eyes. I couldn't see the bigger picture then. Indeed, my aunt and uncle, who couldn't have children due to an illness, always doted on me whenever they visited. They loved me so much that I knew they had often criticized my parents' treatment towards me. They were the ones who spent time with me, the one left alone while my parents focused on my older brother. My aunt played with me, and my uncle bought me the latest treats and cute clothes. The memories I have with my aunts and uncle far outnumber those of my parents. My uncle, who had just been with my parents, started a conversation like this. "Your parents, they don't plan on letting you go to high school. They said when you turn 16, they want you to work to help fund Scott's college education. We can't turn a blind eye to this. Olivia, you have the right to go to school and you don't need to work yourself to the bone for the family." I was stunned. I had no idea my parents planned to rob me of my future for the sake of my brother. It made sense then why they hadn't attended parent-teacher meetings for the past few years. They didn't have an interest in me or my dreams and aspirations. They expected me to work like a mule. My aunt and uncle knelt down and comforted me as I crumbled on the spot. "We may not be your real parents and you might feel awkward, but we will make sure you're happy," they said. Tears welled up in my aunt's eyes as she hugged me tightly, overcome with emotion. "Olivia, you have the right to be happy. We should have come for you sooner. If you're okay with it, we want you to become our daughter," my uncle added, his eyes reddening, looking straight at me. I wondered if I had ever been desired by adults in this way before. I was only just over 10 years old, but I knew what I had to choose. I decided to become their adopted daughter. Fast forward 10 years. Since they took me in, my aunt and uncle have showered me with immense love and had given me countless joyful experiences. My aunt enjoyed picking out clothes for me and would take me shopping on holidays, and my uncle, who said he always wanted to drink with his daughter, had a bottle of wine from the year I was born ready for my 21st birthday. We went on trips together, and my uncle, surprisingly childlike, would take me to zoos and aquariums even when I was in high school. Those are unforgettable and irreplaceable memories that I never had with my biological parents. At first, I called them aunt and uncle, but gradually I began to see them as my parents. Now, I call them mom and dad. I heard from them that when my parents visited, they drunkenly said to my aunts and uncle, "Olivia's just hopeless. She's not cute and her looks are a bit, well, lackluster. She's not smart either. Honestly, we don't need a stupid daughter. We have our excellent eldest son, Scott." My aunt and uncle were furious at these words, and when my parents started saying they wouldn't let me go to high school, the topic of adoption came up. I'm forever grateful to my aunt who wasn't drinking that New Year's Eve and drove all the way to me in the middle of the night. I want to repay my wonderful parents for all they've done. I wanted to become a daughter who my foster parents would be glad to have adopted. With this in mind, I studied relentlessly after entering high school. Truth be told, a lot was going on during my high school entrance exams and I couldn't fully focus. Therefore, after starting high school, I decided to strive for a future that wouldn't embarrass my aunt and uncle and set that as my goal. My hard work paid off and I was able to enter a renowned public university. However, that was not enough to show my gratitude to my aunts and uncle. No, my dear parents. I want them to have an easy life in the future. With this in mind, I continued to study hard after entering college, obtained a weather forecaster license during my student years, and now I'm appearing on television as a weather forecaster. In addition, I wanted to make my aunts and uncle proud, so I worked hard on dieting and exercising, and now I have earned the nickname Beautiful Weather Forecaster. Looking back, I always resembled my brother in looks, so I had the potential to become a beauty too. My aunt and uncle always said that they were proud of me, but I feel that with this, I have become a daughter they can be genuinely proud of. I have so many things to repay and gratitude to express. I won't hold back my efforts. Just when I was thinking that, my biological parents suddenly appeared before me. "Olivia, oh, you've grown so much. You've become such a fine young lady." My parents, tears welling up in their eyes, clung to me. I was just about to leave the TV station and get into my car when this happened, and I was unable to catch up with the situation. Honestly, I had not seen them for so long that I did not recognize them at first. "We were shocked to see you on TV. Scott said it was Olivia. We never expected you to become such a beautiful woman, and a weather forecaster too? That's incredible." My father, as if to say, "Just as expected of my daughter," patted me on the shoulder. "Really, just as expected of our daughter. We are so proud." They really said it. I couldn't hide the look of disgust on my face and glared at my parents. But my parents continued the conversation without showing any sign of concern. "Oh, that's right. Since we've met, why don't we have a meal at the fancy restaurant just ahead?" "You must be earning a lot as a weather forecaster, right?" What is their intention after lying and waiting for me like stalkers? And after suggesting a meal at a fancy restaurant, they asked if I earn a lot. Don't they just look like they're trying to freeload off me? They won't be able to parasite off me. I have to drive them away so they won't want to see me again. As I thought this, a plan popped into my head. Oh, this could work. "Mom, Dad, it's nice to see you, but I have another job today so I can't go out to eat. Sorry." Of course I didn't have another job. I do have a plan to give my beloved aunt and uncle a meal at a fancy restaurant as a wedding anniversary gift. Oh, that's too bad. I didn't miss my mother's slight clicking of her tongue. "Could you maybe share your contact information? I'm organizing a small party for my birthday soon, and I'm inviting people from the TV station. There will be plenty of delicious food, and it'll be fancy, so I'd love to invite you too." Upon hearing this, my parents' eyes noticeably lit up. "Really? Oh, aren't we lucky? So actors will be coming as well?" "Oh, Dad, of course they'll be there." My parents were visibly excited, their smiles widening. Little did they know, no actors would be present. It was a small gathering, mainly a weather reporter's party. The main guests were people from the newspaper and TV station staff. At best, the most glamorous attendees would be the announcers and some TV personalities. Meeting my parents' expectant eyes, I simply smiled and said, "See you at the party," then left. A month later, as planned, I booked a venue and my birthday party took place. Despite being small, a good number of people gathered because, well, we rented a party venue. My parents arrived, arms waving, calling out, "Olivia!" They acted as if they wanted everyone to know they were my parents. It really gets on my nerves. "Dad, Mom, welcome. Could you head to the dressing room right away? They'll help you with everything from your clothes to makeup. The clothes you're wearing are lovely, but they also have rental designer clothes. Enjoy the atmosphere while you're here." At my suggestion, my parents beamed widely. They were so easy to read. They can't hide their joy. "Oh my, designer clothes. I hardly ever get the chance to wear them. I wonder if they'll suit me." "Haha, Mom, you put on a bit of weight." "Oh, stop it, Dad." While they were having this exchange, I flattered them. "You both still look young and beautiful, so anything will suit you." It seemed as if they'd been waiting for that compliment, and they both nodded in agreement. When I was a child, I was scared of being disliked any more than I already was. I couldn't see my parents clearly, and I couldn't understand what they were thinking. But looking at them now, they seemed quite simple. High-quality things, power, beautiful things. They're the type of people who wag their tails at things everyone likes. My parents, having had their hair and makeup done, were in high spirits as they returned to the party venue. My mother was in a pale pink mini dress that revealed her shoulders, something a young woman would wear. Her appearance was ridiculously inappropriate for her age. The sagging skin on her knees gave away her age. My father chose a bright red suit with a flashy tie decorated with yellow and green geometric patterns. He was the only one in the venue dressed in such a flashy suit. Even if there was no dress code, no one would choose such a poor combination. The clothes were indeed designer labels, but they were secondhand. I had actually prepared all of it. I want my parents to wear these today. These clothes remind me of a family party we attended when I was young. When I said that, neither the makeup artist nor the costume staff questioned it. Of course, I have no memories of attending a party with these parents. A lie is a convenient thing. My parents, who believe without a doubt in designer labels, seemed more than happy as long as I repeatedly said it suited them. In the past old days, my parents would listen to anything my outstanding brother said as long as it wasn't about me. Now they are on the receiving end of such remarks, with the outstanding label now on me. After a while, the party started, and as today's star, it was my turn to give a speech. Before I went up on stage, I told my parents, "I have a message for both of you in my speech today, so make sure to listen carefully," and I held their hands. They looked at me with surprise and said, "What?" But they kept looking at me happily, even after I had gone up on stage. Thank you all for coming to my birthday party today. I would also like to thank everyone who helped organize this party," I began. At my words, my friends teased me, shouting, "You're so formal," and "You're not usually like this, are you?" Hearing this, I jokingly responded, "I'm just being myself," and turned towards my parents. "My parents are here today, right over there," I said, pointing in their direction. The lighting staff took the cue and spotlighted my parents. "Those are my brazen parents who had the audacity to appear on TV and even set an ambush for me, despite having abandoned me in my teenage years." A murmur rippled through the crowd at my statement. It was not surprising, as I had rarely discussed my past with anyone other than close friends. "What? Olivia, how could you say such a thing?" My mother jumped up while my father was left in stunned silence. Since I was about the age when I started kindergarten, those two constantly compared me to my high-performing older brother, Scott, and always favored him over me. I was the one who never got treats, had to wear Scott's hand-me-down clothes. Until I was in grade school, I still loved my parents despite all that. For a child, parents are everything. But during middle school, they started to impose household chores on me and finally declared they wouldn't let me go to high school. They wouldn't even attend parent-teacher conferences. That's when my caring uncle and aunt decided to adopt me. Saying this about myself feels odd, but usually I am quite cheerful. That's because my uncle and aunt have repeatedly told me with love that I am not a bad child. They allowed me to gain confidence and overcome my shyness, turning me into the positive person I am today. Therefore, it seemed my normally cheerful demeanor and my harsh background were a shocking contrast for the audience. There were immediate murmurs of the worst and how could they appear on their daughter's birthday dressed like that? The crowd started to criticize my parents. Unable to withstand the surrounding gaze, my parents hung their heads and trembled. But now, I am grateful to those two. It's because of them that I was able to find my real parents, my uncle and aunt, who showered me with the warmth of a family. At these words, my parents stared at me as if expecting some twist where they would be acknowledged as important parents as well. I merely responded with a quiet, smiling gaze. "Mr. Treasure from the Daily Info, are you here? Please make this story and these pictures into an article. Consider it a birthday present for me." As I called out to a friend from the magazine from the stage, he had already started capturing pictures of my parents. Hey, stop it! Stop it! Don't take pictures!" My parents frantically tried to hide their faces. Shameless till the very end, I shouted at them. "You always made me do things I didn't want to do, even when I begged you to stop. You can't just force others and not expect to be forced yourself." At my reprimand, my mother's eyes welled up with tears. "I'm sorry. If you make this into an article, it will also harm your mother and father. You wouldn't want that, would you, Olivia?" I was flabbergasted by her audacity. "Do you really think I still consider you two as my parents? You barely raised me. You completely abandoned your duties as parents. My real parents are my uncle and aunt. They are the only ones I consider as my mother and father. Don't ever interfere in my life again." Before I knew it, recalling all that happened, my gratitude towards my uncle and aunt, tears began to stream down my face. The attendees, seeing my state, forcefully escorted my parents out of the venue. It's over, this time for real. I have finally severed all ties with those people. As a child, I cut them off to find shelter with my uncle and aunt. But now I have truly distanced them from me, all by myself. Feeling accomplished and grateful to my uncle and aunt, I shed a few more tears for the growth I have achieved. But right now, I feel incredibly refreshed. After that, the magazine editor asked me, "Are you really okay with this?" I responded, "Yes, please proceed," and they ended up writing an article about my upbringing. The story was quite sensational. It was picked up by many TV shows. There were worries about my image taking a hit, but in reality, the narrative became a drama of a corner girl making a dramatic turnaround, a close look at a modern Cinderella. I received mostly favorable press, and the whole thing boosted my reputation instead of hurting it. On the other hand, those two, I know it might be confusing, so let's reluctantly call them parents. After my story was published, they were given the cold shoulder by our neighbors, leading to their decision to move houses. The gossip spread quickly at my father's workplace, and he was pushed to resign. My mother, who had always been a homemaker, was now unemployed as well. My brother Scott informs me that they were getting by on their savings. Yes, even after I was adopted, Scott remained concerned for me and would visit me at my new home with my aunt and uncle. Initially, he had expressed a desire for us to live together again, but soon acknowledged that it was a better decision for me to stay with my adoptive family. He was happy for me, confident that I had made the right choice. He was always there for me, even during my college years, guiding me in my studies. My precious older brother, Scott. Upon learning that I had revealed everything to the magazine, Scott decided to sever all ties with our biological parents. He would often joke, "The next time I'll see them is probably at their funeral," but knowing Scott, he probably wouldn't even attend that. 5 years had passed since then. I ended up marrying Mr. Treasure, who was working at the magazine that published my story. We now have children, and I'm a mother of a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. As a mother, I want to make sure my children are treated equally and can grow up in a happy and carefree environment, just like the selfless love that was shown to me by my aunt and uncle. And also like my brother Scott, who has always watched over me even from a distance. I want them to grow up to be kind and gentle to everyone they meet. But I still have other things I need to do besides raising my kids. Yes, that's to repay the kindness of my aunt and uncle. This year, for our wedding anniversary, I surprised them with a trip to Oregon, which we enjoyed together with my husband and children. My aunt and uncle would often tell me, "Olivia, you have your own family now, you don't need to do this." But this act of giving back is also a source of joy for me. It's not out of obligation, but rather because I want to see their happy faces. It's something that gives my life meaning. I jokingly tell them, "Don't take away my pleasure," as I start planning for our next surprise. Maybe a luxurious hotel stay for the entire family would be nice next time. There are still so many things we want to do as a family.
If you have a complaint, then you can leave. This is our home. I finally lost my temper at the person in front of me who was yelling at me. Sheesh, I really did it, didn't I? I thought so for a moment, but I had no regrets. My name is Susan, 33 years old. I live with my husband John and our 3-year-old daughter, Lily. I started working part-time at a local supermarket after Lily started kindergarten. Although my days are nothing special, I've come to appreciate my ordinary life. But for the past 6 months, I've been bothered by something.
Hey Susan, this is a stylish outfit. You should have been careful when washing it.
The person showing me the slightly wrinkled clothes complained. She's John's sister, and my sister-in-law. Her name is Patricia. She's unmarried, and as far as I remember, she's 40 years old. Huh? I didn't know. It was just mixed in with the usual laundry, so I didn't notice.
I would think you would know it's an expensive one just by looking at it. But I suppose you wouldn't understand, being fond of non-brands, Susan.
When she said that, she went back to her room with a face like it can't be helped. Well, you should wash it yourself then, I said under my breath. It was always like this. Patricia seemed to take it for granted that I would take care of things for her. Even after I had done her laundry, she treated me like this. It was so frustrating, and for some reason, I was even preparing my sister-in-law's lunch.
You're making Lily's lunch, right? Then could you make mine too?
I tried to refuse, suggesting she should make her own, but she responded,
I've never made lunch before. My mom always did it for me.
I don't care. I'm not your mother. Then, this stupid sister-in-law took my daughter's lunchbox to the office without permission, which I made early in the morning. I lost it. Couldn't you tell it was Lily's? Just by looking at it? Lily was crying this morning because her favorite lunchbox was missing. Despite how angry I was, she just responded,
I thought you'd made it for me since it was on the table. I'm sorry.
With a silly grin on her face. What's with that face? It's not cute at all, I thought to myself. By the way, her review of the lunch was,
I'm on a diet, so it was just the right amount.
She could at least say thank you. I suggested she could just buy lunch, but she replied she didn't want to because it would be unbalanced nutritionally. As a sort of revenge, I made her lunches filled with frozen meals a few times, but it didn't seem to bother her. Basically, it was clear she just wanted to make her own life easier. Enough! Half a year ago, we began living in this house with my in-laws. Since we moved here, I've found myself getting irritated much more frequently. Even if I told John about it, he didn't seem to take it seriously, while I was begrudgingly doing the housework.
Susan, I'm sorry.
My mother-in-law, leaning on her cane, started a conversation. She had lost her husband about a decade ago and had continued to work as a full-time employee since then. She had slightly high blood pressure, which led to her suffering a stroke one day. Fortunately, she survived, but was left with a slight paralysis on her right side. With the help of a cane and leg brace, she could still manage to walk. However, maintaining her job was too much of a challenge, so she had to quit her long-term employment. Now she lives on her pension.
It's a real lifesaver that you've come. Thank you, Patricia. As always, I apologize, she said.
My mother-in-law had no language impairment and could converse like this. Whenever my sister-in-law and I had a disagreement, she would always apologize to me like this. To my selfish sister-in-law, my mother-in-law would regularly say,
"Enough is enough. You should leave right now."
But my sister-in-law would just respond with,
"Huh? Why? It's convenient to live here since it's close to work. Okay, I'll consider it,"
showing that she wasn't really taking it seriously. My mother-in-law was never an old-fashioned bully, and she would always thank me. Even my daughter Lily was very attached to my mother-in-law. When I first heard that my mother-in-law had collapsed, I could never have imagined that things would turn out this way. Because my sister was also living with her, and even though my sister-in-law had a job, my mother-in-law was neither bedridden nor needed 24-hour nursing care. I just thought I'd drop by once in a while and lend a helping hand if needed. But my husband thought differently. "Let's move into my parents' house." My husband told me this after my mother-in-law's collapse, and after a day at work. "What?" Caught by surprise, I stared at him open-mouthed, and he said, "I've already contacted the real estate agent, and we'll terminate the lease at the end of next month." You can't just spring this on me, and moving in together all of a sudden? Wouldn't your mother dislike that? I was shocked and told him so. Despite what I said, my husband said, "It'll be fine, and it's my childhood home after all. I'll be comfortable there, and I know my mom would be happy living with her son and granddaughter." How easygoing could he be? "Well, it might be fine for you, John, since it's your childhood home." "Lily, you'd like to live with Grandma, right?" Asked this by my husband. Our innocent daughter answered,
"Yes, Lily loves Grandma."
At that time, I didn't think my sister-in-law would be so terrible, and I seriously thought it would be tough to leave my mother-in-law to Patricia. Patricia must have a tough time handling it all alone. "Let's all pitch in and help until things settle down," I told my husband. In response to my words, my husband replied, "Huh? Help out? Well, yeah, sure." His response was vague, and I wasn't sure if he understood or not. And that's how things went. And before we knew it, we had moved into my husband's family home. As I expected, my mother-in-law had a complicated expression on her face on the first day we moved in.
"I'm really fine, you know. Susan, suddenly moving in? You must have disliked it, right?"
She told me with an indescribable expression on her face. Upon hearing those words, I immediately knew that my husband had made the decision to move in with his mother against her will. But there is such a thing as getting used to circumstances, and despite our initially stiff interactions, my mother-in-law and I gradually became amiable through continued conversations. She willingly helped with dinner and the household chores, saying it was sort of like therapy. My parents' house is far away from the center, and I was deeply moved. My mother and I used to cook together like this. It's kind of nostalgic.
"Lily will help too."
Ever since she started attending kindergarten, my daughter Lily's vocabulary has grown. She plays with a lot of her friends, and her appetite has significantly increased. She's become more assertive recently, and when her favorite clothes are in the wash or she dislikes her hairstyle, she often has a sulky expression. Even that behavior is cute, and I can tell she's becoming more independent.
"I'm taking a day off from kindergarten today."
Even when she puts on a sulky face.
"Oh, Lily, you're looking super cute today, just like a princess,"
When told this by her grandmother, she'd often perk up and cheerfully go to kindergarten. My self-centered husband and sister-in-law Patricia continued to be a source of concern, but I began to think that life at my in-laws might not be so bad. I never imagined what would happen next.
Hey, since we started living in my childhood home, you should increase my allowance.
One day, my husband actually said this. I didn't quite understand what he meant. Huh? What do you mean? It's hard to understand. As I said this, my husband looked puzzled and said,
Well, we're living here now, so we're not paying rent or utility bills, right? So you can give that to me as my allowance.
He said something stupid like that. Moreover, my husband said it was strange that his allowance remained unchanged, even though our household income should have increased since I started working part-time.
We've come back to my original home, and everything is free.
He even said that. What? Free? What's he talking about? Thinking to myself. Was it me, or was my husband crazy? I really couldn't understand what he was saying. If I had to say, I was confident it was my husband who was being ridiculous. Well, it's true that this is your mother's house, but we're living here and we often pay for groceries and daily necessities. The house we lived in was owned by my mother-in-law and had already been paid off by my late father-in-law. It was now her property. I believed that the utilities in the home maintenance fund, property tax, and fire insurance were paid by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law Patricia. Since I do most of the shopping, groceries and daily necessities are calculated from our household budget. For this, my mother-in-law would say apologetically after shopping, "How much was it? Let me pay it this time." But I refused. Sure, our expenses may have decreased a bit compared to when we were renting, but the addition of 2 more people meant that food expenses certainly increased, and when we could spare it, we were gracefully saving up for our daughter Lily's future. Furthermore, I was making lunch for my husband every day, and he rarely ate outside. My husband, who didn't have many friends, spent his holidays at home, mostly playing video games. Did he really need an allowance? I thought, but I gave him a reasonable amount anyway. I couldn't understand what he was so dissatisfied with. But when my husband John realized that our household was covering the living expenses, he muttered,
"Why, that's silly,"
as he walked to his mother's room. What the hell is his problem? The one who's weird is him, not me. As I was thinking this and preparing for our daughter's kindergarten the next day, I began to hear a commotion coming from my mother-in-law's room. I peeked into the room, only to find John furiously questioning,
"Why? Why do we have to contribute to living expenses? This is Mom's house, isn't it?"
What is he even talking about? That's what I thought. As I glanced at my mother-in-law, she wasn't reprimanding him. Instead, she was just blankly staring at him, as if it was someone else's problem. Her eyes looked like those of a person who had given up on everything. Noticing my presence, John came over to me and said,
"We don't have to pay anymore."
He left, seemingly relieved, with a smug expression on his face. Watching his triumphant retreating figure, I cursed myself for my poor judgment in marrying such an idiot. However, if things continue this way, I might end up being labeled as a bad wife who doesn't want to contribute to the living expenses, protesting to my mother-in-law, and relying on John. I was getting anxious about this when my mother-in-law chuckled and said, "Susan, shall we have some tea?" She called out to me like that. That's when I heard a certain story from my mother-in-law. I was about to learn a shocking truth and a certain plan of hers. A few days later, my mother-in-law and I were preparing dinner with my daughter Lily, just like we usually do. That day, we were making Lily's favorite dish, dumplings. Lily was also helping out. making dumplings in her own unique shape.
This is fun.
It's good fine motor skills exercise. With that, my mother-in-law also joined in to help. Lily quickly got bored and started playing with toys in the next room. At that moment, my mother-in-law's smartphone, which was lying on the table, rang. The name displayed was John's. "Oh, I wonder if he forgot something." That's what my mother-in-law said. He probably just forgot what to buy or something. Since our hands were sticky from the dumpling filling, she skillfully used the back of her hand to pull the call on speaker. "Hello, Mom? Hey, come on, answer the phone properly." What a rude guy. This is awkward. I glanced at my mother-in-law, who was silently staring at her phone. "Help out with the shopping once in a while." My mother-in-law forced my husband and sister-in-law to go shopping because it was a holiday. Just as I was about to respond to John on the phone,
John, did Mom answer the phone?
I heard my sister-in-law's voice. "No, I couldn't hear anything. Do you think Lily messed with it?" Hearing John say that, my sister-in-law began to say something alarming.
But still,
My mother-in-law and I turned pale as we listened to what came next. Our hands were all sticky, but we quickly pressed the record button. The call ended after a while. After washing my hands, I made a call to a certain place.
we're back.
After a while, John and my sister-in-law, who had no idea, returned home. "I'm back. Wait, what are you two up to?" No wonder my husband John and my sister-in-law looked so surprised. That's because me and my mother-in-law, with a troubled face, were sitting at the table in the living room, glaring at the two of them.
Huh? What's with you two? You're scaring me.
My sister-in-law said something like that.
Sit down. We have something to discuss with you two,
My mother-in-law said, then signaled to me. I nodded suddenly, and then played the recording of their conversation that I had taken earlier.
Still, I guess we can't get Mom's money unless she's gone, right?
My sister-in-law spoke to my husband John in a casual tone, like she was deciding what to have for dinner. "Is that so? That's a bummer. You said you found $50,000. That's why I came here. The worst part is Mom is really sneaky. That's definitely Dad's inheritance. We only got a merely $1,000. Their conversation went on. Finally, my sister-in-law said,
She's so slow, it's frustrating, isn't it? Like when she's slowly going down the stairs? Don't you sometimes want to push her?
My sister-in-law said something awful, and my foolish husband John agreed. I totally get it. The call ended abruptly there. The two of them looked visibly uncomfortable, clearly never having imagined we were listening in. Hearing their conversation, I felt a threat to my mother-in-law's safety and immediately consulted the police. However, they didn't seem very helpful, saying it was a family matter. After the call, my mother-in-law said, I understand how you two feel very well. I've been thinking about it for a while now. I'm selling this house and moving. The two of them were surprised to hear this, eyes wide open. Only my stupid husband and sister-in-law have such stupid faces. In fact, I have been consulting with my mother-in-law about this for a while now. The biggest issue was my sister-in-law. Until I heard about this from my mother-in-law, I had assumed my sister-in-law was contributing a fair share towards living expenses. But it turns out, ever since my sister-in-law started working, she hadn't given a single penny to the household. Perhaps she was still stuck in a student mindset, thinking house chores were the mother's job, and constantly complaining.
It's my hard-earned money. I can spend it on whatever I want, right?
She said this and continued to splurge on beauty treatments, vacations, and luxury goods. If you've got so much money, either move out or contribute some to the household. When my father-in-law was alive, my sister-in-law would get scolded like this. Only at that time, it seems that there was a little pretend to help with housework, but after a while it was just back to normal. She never put any money into the house, and since my father-in-law passed away, my sister-in-law had been taking complete advantage of my mother-in-law and doing whatever she pleased.
But Dad said I should save up instead of paying living expenses. And just because I've started working, it's weird to suddenly ask me to contribute to the household.
I knew she was trouble. Nothing's weird about that. My sister-in-law protested.
I am not the bad one.
Well, I wanted you to save money and move out. After I finished raising my kids, I wanted to have a quiet life. How many years has it been since you started working? You don't contribute a cent to the household. You must be quite the wealthy lady by now. My sister-in-law looked frustrated, seemingly lost for words.
I have a job. Moving out all of a sudden is troublesome.
To add insult to injury, my sister-in-law, lost in her delusions, began to say such things. Why would I take you with me? How silly. You've lived however you've pleased until now. Feel free to continue doing so. Finally understanding my mother-in-law's seriousness, both started to panic.
What about the $50,000? Wasn't that our father's money, Mom? Have you been hiding inheritance shares? I might tell the police.
Such were the words of my foolish sister-in-law. When my mother-in-law fell ill, she must have found the bank book by herself. My husband and I got in touch about our mother-in-law, and the conversation somehow shifted to the $50,000. They probably thought they'd get a share too, which is why my husband hastily moved back in. Their stupidity gave me a headache. With a victorious expression, my mother-in-law calmly said, "That was my money from when I was single. Your father had nothing to do with it. You two have been making a fuss about inheritance, but you foolish kids never let me save any money." My mother-in-law told me that my father-in-law's favorite phrase was, "How long do I have to keep working?" Before marrying me, my husband John lived the same way as my sister-in-law, which shocked me to the core. I remember when we were looking for an apartment, he would ask dumb questions like, "What's a security deposit? A key fee? Homeowner's insurance? Aren't utility bills supposed to be around $30 a month?" I cursed my past self. Our conversation must have woken up Lily, who had been sleeping in the next room. With a sleepy face,
"If you do something wrong, you should say sorry, right? Can Papa and my auntie do that? Since you are grown-ups?"
Lily looked at John and my sister-in-law and said, This made me laugh, which seemed to upset my sister-in-law, who then said,
"What's so funny? You must have said something to Mom."
In response to her, my mother-in-law intervened. "Stop it! Stop it!" However, I calmly replied. I laughed because I found it funny. I thought my daughter Lily was acting more mature than you. I calmly said, "I do the laundry, make lunch, but with no appreciation from you two. Lily can say thank you, right? Why can't you utter a single word, sister-in-law? Are you a baby?" I may have overstepped a bit, but my usual irritation exploded into words. "Aren't you embarrassed to make me wash your tacky underwear? Where did your sense of shame go? It'd be better for you to move out and find it." As I spoke indifferently, my red-faced sister-in-law said,
"If you have any complaints, get out. This is our house. Take that annoying kid and get out."
At this point, I had had enough. "Shut up! You should leave. You? Such an idiot!" I shouted with a voice so loud that my throat hurt, but I didn't regret it one bit. A while ago, after dinner, I was watching TV when a segment came up. "Adult men and women living in their childhood rooms are increasing." Apparently, that's what they call people who, although technically employed, use all their salaries solely for their own pleasure, continue to live at home with their parents, and leave all household chores to them like some selfish demons. The scariest thing I felt when watching this TV show was not the program itself, but the sight of my husband John and my sister-in-law Patricia laughing uproariously at the feature, asking,
Are there really such people out there?
whether my sister-in-law was silenced by my spirited gaze or what I said. A few days later, the day came when my mother-in-law decided to leave the house.
Well then, I'm putting this place up for sale, so I'd like you two to move out by the end of the month.
Saying this, she left without revealing her destination.
Who would have thought it would come to this? We have to find a house for the 4 of us to live in. It would be nice if we could find a nice single-family home.
Upon hearing my husband's absurd words, if it's just the 2 of you, wouldn't a 2-bedroom be enough? I retorted. And to my words, John laughed, asking,
2 people? How do you figure that?
He and my sister-in-law laughed off the situation, but ignoring them, I said, All right then, let's go, Lily. Shall we go to see my mom? At my words, my daughter Lily also responded,
Yes, I'm happy because it's been a while since I've seen Grandpa and Grandma.
She had a smile on her face.
What do you mean?
He is flustered, as if he doesn't know what's going on. His confusion was comical, prompting me to say, I'm divorcing you. The thought that Lily and I could be pushed down the stairs one day scares me. I can't live with you anymore. In response to my words, he stammered,
That was just a joke, right, sis?
My sister-in-law, possibly worried about losing her potential maid, responded,
Yes, so let's live happily together.
John even had the audacity to suggest living together in my parents' home, to which I responded, How can a person who can't even care for his own parents possibly care for others? That's what I told him. Right then, the taxi we had called arrived. As Lily and I got in, I said, Please feel free to live your life as you wish. I left my in-laws home with a smile. In the background, I could hear John crying out,
Don't go! Don't go!
like a child. In the past, I thought that childishness was cute. However, now I can only think of it as, wow, I feel bad. As for John and my sister-in-law, they ended up renting a small apartment with no security deposit or key money, as they had little savings combined. With little life skills and a reluctance to lower their lifestyle, they inevitably struggled to get by. They should struggle. It's too late for regrets. By the way, the reason that my sister-in-law noisily fixed a lunchbox was because she was trying to impress a colleague at work. She didn't know, but the coworker already had a lovely girlfriend. Her lunches, which she obviously didn't make herself, became a topic of office gossip when they abruptly changed from nice meals to something awful in the lunchbox. I heard they caused quite the stir in the office. Apparently, she was the butt of many jokes behind her back. This was a story I heard from a mom friend who happened to work at the same place as my sister-in-law. I couldn't help but laugh. But she's a stranger to me now, so I could care less. Having returned to my parents' home, I now live peacefully with the help of my parents and my daughter Lily. My ex-husband John spent all his free time gaming and hardly ever played with Lily. So far, she hasn't seemed lonely or shed any tears. She has made new friends at her new preschool and seems happy attending there with a smile on her face. When Lily gets a bit older, if she wants to see her father, I'll let her, as that's her right. I wanted to take care of my family and spend each day without any regrets.
Dad, what should we do with this? I'm helping my parents clean up their inn today. The reason is that the building is getting old and it's difficult for my parents to continue running it due to their age, so we decided to close it. At one point, there was talk of me taking over, but it was too much for me and I ended up working as a regular employee. In families with a tradition to inherit, the future is often forced upon you, but my father didn't want to take away my future.
Live as you please. Life is about going with the flow and being guided slowly.
That was my father's favorite phrase. Since we decided to close the inn, many people have visited to share their sadness with us. Couples on their honeymoon, salarymen healing their emotional wounds, people bringing their parents with their first paycheck.
On my way home from work, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire while he was out? Surely it's not our home. Thinking this, I hurried home to find our house safe and sound. Feeling relieved, I had no time to relax. I asked my friend to watch my kids while I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. Although I had heard he suffered from a fire, his burns didn't look severe. The room had 2 beds, and the other bed had its curtain closed. According to the doctor, my husband had some burns, but they should heal in a few weeks. The more serious issue was a broken spine from jumping out of a 3rd-floor window to escape the fire, which might leave lingering effects. On my way back to the room after the doctor's explanation, a nurse apologized for placing my husband in a room with a female patient. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was also a victim of the same fire, and they were brought to the hospital together. Where did the fire happen? Well, it's work-related, so I can't tell you. Just go home and bring me a change of clothes. Why should I? What do you mean, why? It's normal for a wife to take care of her hospitalized husband's needs. I don't know about that. You always ignore me and the kids when we're sick, so don't expect me to take care of you. That's a ridiculous excuse. While my husband was talking, the door to the hospital room opened. Someone I knew entered, and I was a little confused as the curtain to the other bed was opened. Seeing the person lying in the bed, I was speechless. My name is Amy. I have a family of 4 with my husband and our 2 sons, ages 3 and 5. I'm currently 30 years old and have been working at the company I joined when I was 22. My husband used to work at an IT company but quit about a year ago. The reason, he said, was to adopt a more modern way of working. My husband quit his job without consulting me, which led to an argument, but he wouldn't listen, insisting that freelancing will bring in more money. When I criticized him for not discussing it with the family, rather than worrying about the income, all he would say was, "Don't worry, our income will increase." After quitting, my husband started freelancing from home. At first, things seemed to go well, but he gradually began to slack off. He wouldn't get up until noon and seemed to spend the late nights playing games in his office. Whenever I asked when he was working, he always said, "I have a duty of confidentiality, so I can't discuss my work with you, even as my family," and never gave me a straight answer. Initially, his income was $2,000 a month, but has steadily decreased, and for the past 6 months, it has only been about $500 a month. I wouldn't have minded if he helped with housework with his low income, but despite being home all the time, he didn't do any housework or childcare. Not only did he never help with chores, but when the kids caught a cold, he'd say, "I can't afford to catch it too," and would leave home for a few days. When I got sick, I asked my husband to take care of our son because I was going to the hospital, but he would say, "Why don't you just take the kids and go to the hospital?" And he locked himself in his workroom. With no income, no help with housework or childcare, and not even showing concern for his family, my husband was becoming unbearable. I thought about getting a divorce since it seemed the burden was only on me, and he didn't appear to be a good father to our sons. However, I was so busy every day that I could only make slow progress on preparing for the divorce, and I spent my days feeling frustrated. During that time, my husband, who rarely left home, began to go out more often, claiming he had errands to run and started keeping his cell phone with him at all times. I quickly noticed the changes in my husband and suspected him of having an affair. In the past, I might have been shocked by my husband's infidelity, but this time I secretly celebrated in my heart that I could use this to my advantage in getting a divorce. I tried to gather evidence of the affair to get a divorce on the grounds of my husband's fault, but it was difficult to obtain evidence from his cell phone since he never let it out of sight, so I gave up. I considered hiring a private investigator to take photographic evidence, but we were living on almost solely my income, so I had hardly any savings. Every day I worried about how to catch my husband in his infidelity, and I could feel the stress building up. That's when a turning point came for me. After work, as I was heading home, my cell phone rang. When I answered the call, it was the police, telling me that my husband had been injured in a fire. My husband said he had a meeting with someone from work today. A fire away from home? It couldn't be our house, right? I rushed home with these thoughts in mind and found that my house was safe. Although I was relieved, there was no time to relax. I hurriedly went to pick up my sons and called my friend. I asked my friend if she could watch the kids because my husband had been taken to the hospital in an ambulance, and after dropping my sons off at her house, I headed to the hospital. When I entered my husband's hospital room, he was asleep. I had heard about the fire, but his burns didn't seem too severe. The room had 2 beds, and the curtain was drawn around the other bed. As I was standing there in a daze, a nurse came in and told me there would be an explanation from the attending physician, so I left the room. The doctor said that although my husband had some burns, they would heal in a few weeks. What was worse was the broken bones. My husband had jumped from the 3rd floor to escape the fire, and the impact had fractured his spine with the possibility of residual effects. When I was told that there might be residual effects, the first thing that came to mind was that I should have divorced him quickly. I think I'm an insensitive person, but I couldn't even imagine taking care of my husband. As the explanation from the attending physician ended and I was on my way back to the room, the nurse apologized that my husband was sharing a room with a woman. When I asked who the woman was, I was told that she was someone who had been in the same fire as my husband and had been brought in together. Could it be that this woman was my husband's affair partner? I thought as I returned to the room and found my husband awake. Where did the fire happen?
Well, I can't tell you because it's work-related.
Seeing my husband hesitate, I became convinced that he had been with his affair partner when the fire happened.
Anyway, go home and bring me some clothes.
Huh? Why?
Why? You're my wife. It's obvious you should take care of your hospitalized husband.
Huh? I don't know about that. You ignore us when the kids or I are sick, so don't expect me to take care of you.
That's a ridiculous excuse.
As my husband was talking, the door to the room opened. It was Mr. Smith, the husband of my friend. Feeling a little confused to see someone I knew, Mr. Smith bowed to us and opened the curtain to the bed next to us. As the curtain opened, I saw my friend Mrs. Smith lying in the bed. I looked at my husband in surprise, and his face turned pale as he avoided my gaze. Ah, I see. It became clear that my husband's affair partner was Mrs. Smith, and I was too dumbfounded to speak. Mrs. Smith was a close friend among my friends, and she had even brought her child to our house to play. I had introduced Mrs. Smith to my husband at the time, so he should have known that she was my friend. I had told Mrs. Smith about my husband's recent coldness and my suspicion of his affair. I wondered what Mrs. Smith's intentions were when she listened to my story with a serious face, agreeing with me by saying, "I see." Was she trying to find out how much I knew about the affair? Suppressing my urge to confront my husband and Mrs. Smith immediately, I greeted Mr. Smith. "You're Mr. Smith, right? Your wife has always been a great help to me."
"Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just a bit flustered."
"I heard your wife and my husband were in the same fire. He won't tell me where it happened. Do you know anything about it?" When I asked, Mr. Smith glanced briefly at my husband.
"I'm sorry that your husband was also caught in the fire. The fire occurred at my house."
"It happened at your house? I didn't know my husband was visiting you." When I looked back at my husband, he was hiding under the covers. Excuse me, I have something I'd like to talk about. Do you have time?"
"Yes, I have time."
I had a pretty good idea of what Smith was going to talk about. We moved to a nearby diner where Smith told me that he had suspected his wife of cheating for several months and was gathering evidence. He had once looked at his wife's phone and found a photo of her looking cozy with another man in her photo album. So now he had hired a private investigator to take indisputable photos of the affair. I told him that I had also suspected my husband of cheating for a while, but didn't know who the other person was. When I said I intended to divorce my husband, Smith agreed to help me, and we discussed our plans for the future. 2 days later, Mr. Smith and I went to the hospital together, and my husband and Mrs. Smith were still sharing a room. When my husband and Mrs. Smith saw us enter, their faces tightened. "I'm glad you both seem well. I came to your room the day before yesterday, but you were resting, so I couldn't talk to you. Are your injuries okay?" Yeah. I fractured my shoulder, so I need to rest for a while." "That's tough. You'll need money now, so I hope you recover quickly." "Well, our child is still young, too." "That's right. You'll have to pay child support, so you'd better heal up and start looking for a job." Mrs. Smith seemed confused and didn't understand what I was talking about.
"Hey, stop rambling. You brought my clothes, right?"
"I didn't bring them."
"You're useless."
"I told you before that I wouldn't take care of you anymore. What I brought you today isn't a change of clothes, it's this." As I said this, I took the divorce papers out of my bag and shoved them in front of my husband.
Huh? Divorce papers? Are you planning to dump me because I might have lingering injuries?
It's not because of your injuries. You said you had a business meeting the day you were taken to the hospital, right? So why were you at Mrs. Smith's house?
Well, I didn't tell you, but Mrs. Smith is a business associate. We were discussing work at her house when the fire happened.
Did you think that excuse would work? It's obvious that I know about your affair with Mrs. Smith. No matter how much you try to deceive and make excuses, it just looks ridiculous. As I said that, my husband's face turned sour and he defiantly retorted,
Stop nagging about a little affair. Don't make such a fuss over a single affair. What will you do after the divorce? Can you raise our 2 kids on your own?
Of course I can. I've been raising them on my own all this time. You've never taken care of the kids, have you?
I've played with them.
It's only about an hour once every few months. The neighborhood fathers play with their kids' fathers more than you do.
Well, then it'll be tough with just one income. We've been living on 2 incomes up until now. Do you want our child to live in the hardship?
It'll be fine. In fact, without your expenses, our lives might even be easier.
But I'm injured.
So?
If people find out you left a husband who needs rehab, your reputation will suffer. It'd be better to divorce me after I'm fully recovered.
Because you are not someone who can stick to things for long. It's clear that you will give up on rehabilitation midway through. I can't wait until you fully recover. You have your lover to take care of, don't you? Upon hearing this, the husband glanced at Mrs. Smith and seemed to reluctantly accept the situation.
If you insist, I understand. I don't need you anymore. A bastard who serves divorce papers to an injured person. I'll divorce you. Now hand over the divorce papers.
As he reached out to grab the divorce papers, I kept them out of reach. No way.
What are you talking about? You want a divorce, right?
We haven't discussed alimony or child support yet.
You're trying to take money from an injured person? I need money for hospital bills and rehab.
Oh, right. You better hurry up with rehab and start earning money to pay alimony. You don't have any savings, do you? Huh? No savings? Mrs. Smith reacted with surprise to my words. My husband gave me a serious look and glared at me. You said you had 4 digits in savings. You said freelancing was profitable.
I meant I have enough income to easily save 4 digits. I'm just spending it as soon as it comes in now, but I can save up money quickly.
My husband desperately tried to make excuses. Although his current income was hardly $500 a month, I kept quiet because I didn't want to start a fight over it. Since they agreed to the divorce, I explained the future plans to my husband and Mrs. Smith. I told them that we had chosen a lawyer to consult about the compensation for the affair and that we would receive a certified mail from the lawyer later. Then we left the hospital room. As I returned home, I started preparing to move. While my husband was hospitalized, I went to thank the friend who took care of our children the day my husband was taken to the emergency room, bringing her a box of chocolates. I told my friend that my husband was fine, as he had been taken to the emergency room after the fire at Mrs. Smith's house, but was not in life-threatening condition. Moreover, the mom friend offered to take care of our children if things got difficult, so I also told her that I planned to divorce and move because of my husband's infidelity. Although I didn't directly mention that Mrs. Smith was my husband's affair partner, my friend seemed to understand. Of course, I intentionally made it obvious to my friend, but there were a few people who knew about my husband's involvement at Mrs. Smith's house fire, so the rumor would have spread even without me saying anything. Later, as we planned, I asked a lawyer to proceed with a divorce, but we couldn't easily decide on the compensation and child support amounts. At first, my husband boasted,
I'm a freelancer, so I can work from bed even if I'm injured. I plan to work all day because I'm free. I might even make over $100,000 a year. I won't take you back even if I become rich.
I had hoped that my husband's arrogance would make him pay the compensation and child support, but his hope of making $100,000 a year was shattered sooner than expected, and he started being reluctant to pay. He went from asking for an extension on the payment deadline to requesting a reduction in the amount, and eventually called me directly to plead.
Come on, $20,000 in compensation is too much. My infidelity is partly because you ignored me saying you were busy. Isn't $5,000 more reasonable? It's not that I can't make money. The clients who used to hire me stopped because I didn't meet the deadline once. It was just a few days late, so it's not my fault. I can't pay the compensation. If you really want the money, talk to those clients who stopped hiring me.
I've told you many times, talk to the lawyer about the compensation. I said just that and hung up the phone. After that, I asked the lawyer to tell my husband that we would go through mediation if the negotiations dragged on, and my husband easily accepted our terms. From there, everything went smoothly, and we received a lump sum payment for compensation and child support, finalizing the divorce.
The Smith couple also divorced, and the husband gained custody of the children. The Smith family has 3 children, but it was revealed that during the affair, the wife left the 10-year-old eldest son to take care of the 2 younger siblings while she went out. After my son and I moved close to my parents' home, I heard from a friend that my husband and Mrs. Smith got remarried. The 2 of them are still living in the house where the fire occurred. My husband walks with a cane, and Mrs. Smith always has messy hair and a gloomy expression, making them look like an elderly couple even though they're still in their 30s. My husband has accumulated over $100,000 in debt due to alimony and child support payments, and Mrs. Smith, who is a stay-at-home mom, is being asked to pay child support for all 3 children, so together they must have quite a lot of debt. But I don't feel sorry for them since I significantly reduced the amount I claimed from my husband on the condition of a lump sum payment. My husband always blames others for his misfortunes, so I'm sure he's still doing that now. I felt refreshed after finally getting away from him. However, I feel guilty for making my 2 sons suddenly separate from their father and friends. At first, they were both bewildered in the unfamiliar place, but now they have become friends with the neighborhood kids and are having fun. On weekends, my parents come to visit and play with my sons, allowing me to have some time to myself. Since my husband left, I now have more time, money, and peace of mind. Thanks to the extra resources, I can give even more love and attention to my sons than before.